Hello, this is Claus Jensen presenting an excellent game from round 8 of the Aeroflot Open. This was a very important game between two of the contenders for the win. Quang, playing white, was leading after round 7, but in this penultimate round he was up against Cheparinov, who could tie for first if he could win this game with the black pieces. So there was a lot at stake in this game, and fortunately the players were prepared for an open battle. So please enjoy this extremely complicated King's Indian game, Quang against Cheparinov. The game starts knight f3, knight f6, c4, g6, knight c3, bishop g7, e4, d6, d4, castles, bishop e2, e5, castles, knight c6, and with d5, Quang decides to close the center here, knight e7, knight e1, knight d7, f3, f5, and g4. And normally, white is expected to play on the queen side, but this idea of fighting for space on the king side is not new. Knight f6, knight d3, c6, and despite this early d5 from Quang, there's a lot of tension in the center. Bishop e3, king h8, king h1, b5, and g5. Quang continues the plan of grabbing space on the king side before starting his queen side operations. And this pawn also takes away both f6 and g6 squares for the black knights. So it's a way to try to grab some space on the king side. Knight h5, knight b4, and here c takes d5, c takes d5, a6 and a4 would fit in nicely with the white plan of playing on the queen side. So instead, Cheparinov plays c5, and then knight c6, and here Cheparinov could have played something relatively quiet like taking on c6, and then b4, knight d5, and taking on e4, playing knight f4, knight takes, e takes, bishop d4, something like this, after which he could pick up the pawn on c6 with an unclear but still interesting position. But Cheparinov chooses another plan, a more direct attack on the white king in true King's Indian style. So he didn't take on c6, instead he played queen d7. And the plan was that after c takes b5, then f takes e4, knight takes, and knight f5, because this was the only way to develop the knight, since the normal plan, knight e7 to g8 and then to h6 or f6 doesn't work because of the pawn here on g5. Queen d2, knight d4, b4, and queen h3, and now Cheparinov goes for the initiative on the king side, and this was the plan when he played queen d7. If rook f2 in this position, then there's a knight sack, knight takes f3, which is in fact the same idea as in the actual game, and after bishop takes, rook e1, bishop g4. The threat is rook takes f2 followed by bishop f3 check, and Quang still has to defend his bishop on e3, which is attacked twice. So this may be holdable for white, but black has a very strong initiative here. So Quang didn't play rook f2, instead he played king g1. And Cheparinov continues the attack with the knight sack that we saw in the previous line. He plays knight takes f3 here. And bishop takes f3, rook takes f3. But this time it's not as effective as in the previous line, because now Quang could have played rook takes, queen takes, and this queen takes f3 now comes without check, so Quang has time to create some counterplay with knight takes d6. And then a possible continuation could be something like bishop h3, queen f2, queen g4 check, king h1, rook f8, and here the computer likes knight takes e5 for white, but it's still very complicated stuff. And Quang instead played rook a to e1. Cheparinov continues to throw everything at Quang, who quietly plays b takes e5. Then came rook takes f1, rook takes, bishop f3, and it's obvious that Le Quang is under some pressure here, and he has more alternatives here. Interesting was perhaps knight g3, and after rook f8, knight takes, queen takes. Le Quang would probably have to give up his rook for this monster bishop on f3 anyway, so he decided to do it right away. He gave his rook for the bishop on f3, and after queen takes and knight f2, Le Quang is now down the exchange, but it seems he has been able to stop Cheparinov's attack, and he can now hope for the queenside pawns to give him chances of winning the game. Cheparinov played queen f5, c takes d6, and knight f4, threatening to take on g5. Bishop takes, e takes, and queen d3. Queen d3 followed, and this is actually a mistake. Better would have been to play h4 in this position to defend the pawn on g5. But after queen d3 came queen g5 check, king f1. And now Cheparinov has a nice tactic. And I wonder if you can spot this tactic. You can pause the video and try to find a very nice move that is decisive for the game. Cheparinov played the very nice f3. And the point is that if knight e4, then queen g2 check, queen g1, and then the pawn will go for conversion, or at least decide the game for black. And if just d7, leaving the knight on f2 would lose the knight because of queen g2 check again, king e1, queen g1 check, and if king d2, then of course queen takes f2, and instead if queen f1, then there's a nice check on c3. So this wins in all lines. So queen takes f3 is forced, and after rook f8, it may not look too decisive for black, but just watch now how Cheparinov starts picking all Le Quang's pawns, because white has to defend the pinned knight on f2. Queen d3 followed, queen f4 putting pressure on f2, queen g3 defending it, queen c4 check, king g1, and queen takes d5. And Le Quang cannot move the knight, even though it's not pinned at this point, because of queen d1 check would be winning for Cheparinov. So a4 instead, bishop d4, pinning the knight on f2, and of course Le Quang is forced to exchange on d4, and now the knight is pinned. a5, rook f6, b6, a takes, a6, king g7, a7, queen a1 check, king d2, and queen takes a7. And white has not been able to move his pieces at all. He has just pushed his pawns, and now Cheparinov has picked them almost everyone. Queen e1, queen d7, and Le Quang has no counterplay left because his queenside pawns are gone, as I said before, and the game is lost. And his last move in the game was knight e4. And after Cheparinov's queen g4 check, Le Quang resigned the game. And I hope you enjoyed this very exciting game just as much as I did. And I think the game illustrates very well that the King's Engine is such a rich opening. The complexity of the King's Engine is perhaps also why so many players are afraid of playing it. But for chess lovers, there's nothing better than watching a good King's Engine game, and that's what we got in this game. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you on my blog at klausjensen.com. Bye bye for now.